Hi everyone, in today's video we are going to be talking about why I chose the Sony FX30 as my main cam and why I think this camera beats other Sony cameras at this price range. So without wasting much of your time, let's get right into the video. I have been using the Sony FX30 for the past 1.5 years now, and I must tell you I never regret getting this camera. I've used this camera for several projects like documentaries, wedding videos, music videos, and lots more. This camera has served me in harsh and toxic weather conditions. This camera has really gone through a lot with me and is still standing strong. And these are some of the reasons I feel this camera beats its other competitors, or let me say other cameras at this price range, especially Sony cameras. Before I got the Sony FX30, I was actually looking for, cameras I can use and that is budget friendly, cameras I can get without breaking the bank. I mean, I had less than $2,000 to get the camera, and I was just browsing online to choose between, I think I was thinking of A7 IV and FX30. I was looking at the used Nigerian market to see which I could pick up. I was also looking at cameras like the Sony A7S3. So what I did was to rent out some of these cameras. Like I actually rent A7S3 to see, and I really liked the color science coming from the A7 III because I was using the A7 III. So using the A7S III, it was really impressive. I really loved the low light condition. Then coming from cameras like the A7 III and the A7 II that I was using A7 II, A7R2 and the A7 III. And because these cameras were 8-bit camera, I needed something more cinematic. I needed something I can work on and that will give me really good colors, because I know 10-bit colors are the best. Every filmmakers wants 10-bit color camera, and eventually, due to budget and everything, I had to settle for the Sony FX30. At first, I wasn't happy because I was like, I could have got the A7 IV, but I mean, the A7 IV does not have everything I need, because I'm more of a cinematographer and I don't really do pictures. I only do pictures like in few cases, and I almost regretted paying for this camera. But then when I received this camera and I shot with this camera for the first time, note that I did not rent the Sony FX30 before buying. The cameras I rented were the Sony A7 IV and the Sony A7S III, and I really like them, but I did not want to go for the Sony A7 IV because of the number one, the overheating issue. It does not have 4K 120 frames per second, and even the 4K 60 frame crops in with about 1.5 crop, and I wasn't really satisfied with that. I also watched tons of video online on the Sony FX30, and I was really impressed by the reviews most YouTubers were giving me. And when I dropped my hand on this camera, mind you, before getting the Sony FX30, I've used cameras like the Sony FX3. Yes, I've actually worked on projects with the Sony FX3 before I got my Sony FX30, and I really love the Sony FX3, but it was just more of a Sony A7S III with a cinema body, and I was like, it doesn't worth that extra dollars. Of course, again, I was broke and my budget was really tight, so I had to go for this. But the first few videos I shot on the Sony FX30 changed my mind totally about this camera. I mean, I went from looking at it as a crop sensor, mirrorless camera, it's not going to be good at low light, and something I just need for the main time before I get more money to be able to get my full frame 10-bit camera. But no, this camera gives me a different perspective to filming on mirrorless camera. It doesn't feel like I'm filming on a mirrorless camera, because I've used cinema cameras like the Sony FX30 Mark II. This camera is pretty much giving me this thing I've never gotten from other Sony mirrorless camera. And number one feature I love on this camera is the lot I can import. Oh my god. The moment I discovered I could import lots into my camera, my filmmaking literally changed. And I'm sure you guys know this is not a paid advert, or Sony did not tell me to make this video for the FX30. I'm not an advocate, I'm not a fan, but I'm just, sharing my, real life experience. And my perspective about this camera really changed from it being my B cam to me looking at this camera as my main cam. In fact, I remember one of the first few projects I shot, and I worked for an NGO, and they literally reached out to me and asked me the camera I used to shoot the events and the project. They told me they want to get the same camera for their, communications team. And I was really surprised by the result I could get from this camera. This camera changed my perspective, and I stopped looking at cameras from the same perspective. I stopped looking at all Super 35 or crop sensor as the same thing, because this is nothing compared with the 6400, 6100, 6500 series of Sony, the previous generation of Sony crop sensor. I think the new generation of Sony crop sensor is really making change, and is really making a wave of, this cinematic feel, the color science, depth of field you can even get from a crop sensor is mind-blowing. And one thing I also love about this camera, which I actually find even better than its full frame counterparts like the Sony A7S3, is the autofocus. This camera has excellent autofocus. I actually enjoy the autofocus on the Sony FX30 than I do on the Sony A7S3. And recently, Sony just released an update on the Sony A7S3 to be able to import a lot into the camera. But I want you to know that the Sony FX30 has this thing first. The Sony FX30 is the camera I literally see as, this is a Sony FX3 with a Super 35 sensor. And when I'm saying Super 35 sensor, I want you to remove your mind from the, crop sensor, it's not so good in low light, and all the lies, people tell you, and, filmmakers tell you on YouTube. I'm a big fan of the full frame camera. I'm currently filming this on the Sony A7S3. I love the Sony A7S3 so much. I love the low light features and everything, but I don't think I've ever been disappointed with the videos or pictures I got from this camera at night. I shoot a lot of documentary, I shoot a lot of weddings, and weddings can be up to late night sometimes, and you will need to shoot at night, and I've never gotten any disappointment from this camera. It has served me for so long. I think it's high time beginner filmmakers just stop listening to YouTubers talking about how bad crop sensor cameras can be. And in my opinion, I think any camera from 2021, 2022 upward are really decent cameras, especially Sony cameras. I'm talking about even the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II, A6700. These are really awesome crop sensor camera that I think you should check out. So based on my experience, I think the Sony FX30 is pretty much a camera I believe every beginner that wants to take their filmmaking, or let me say content creation, especially if you're a documentary filmmaker or if you're into filmmaking proper. Now, I'm not talking about hybrid. This camera has photo features, but I don't really like it for pictures. I prefer taking pictures on the Sony A7S3 because it doesn't have a mechanical shutter, and the pictures on this camera are very good, but I don't just like how it feels when I'm taking pictures. So I won't really recommend this camera for hybrid shooter. But if you're a video-based storyteller, like all you do are moving pictures, I think you should go for this camera. One other thing I love about this camera is that it doesn't overheat. I've shot the documentary with both the Sony A7S3 and the FX30 under very harsh weather condition, and after the Sony A7S3 died, the Sony FX30 was still serving me. So I think if you're a content creator, if you're a documentary filmmaker, if you're a wedding filmmaker, especially in Nigeria, most upcoming filmmakers can't afford so much to get expensive full frame cameras. I think you should consider the Sony FX30, and I promise you, this camera is going to be a good start. You can learn so much from this camera and you'll be so surprised with the kind of results you can get with this camera. If you watched my video to these points, I believe you've learned something. So please like, subscribe, and don't forget to leave a comment. Let me know your experience about the Sony FX30 and what else do you think I should talk about with my experience using the Sony FX30. If you are just seeing my video, my name is Samuel Ojo. I'm a documentary filmmaker based in Abuja, Nigeria, and I make YouTube videos on gear reviews. I talk about my journey as a documentary filmmaker. I share my short films here and some of my documentaries. So please like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to share.